Hello and welcome to our session, Reframing the Narrative, Analyzing Canadian University Libraries' Collection Development Policies through an EDII lens. We are glad to spend the next half hour with you all today. Before starting, we would like to acknowledge that we are presenting on the land that are located in the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We embrace that these lands are now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and hope that the work that we are doing helps libraries take steps towards reconciliation and honors the land and its indigenous heritage.
My name is Marta Samukishin, and I'm Collection Development Librarian and Liaison Librarian at St. Paul University in Ottawa, Ontario. I'm also a Research Fellow at BC Campus.
My name is Catherine Lachaine. I'm the current Head Learning and Student Success Librarian at the University of Ottawa.
And I'm Ryan Ravando. I'm a virtual reference operator at Scholars Portal and a library technician at the Fort Erie Public Library.
We would like to acknowledge that this project is supported by St. Paul University internal research funding. We would also like to acknowledge our privilege to undertake this research as white settlers, cisgender, and able individuals. We recognize that this is a sensitive topic and that we are not the representatives or leaders of this discussion. We welcome any comments and concerns or questions from today's participants.
Today's session will be divided in 4 parts. First, we're going to talk about the context and the research problem of our project. Then we'll do a short literature review to situate it in the current research and publication on the topic. We'll discuss the methodology and then jump into the bulk of our presentation, which is our study results and discussion. We'll have some time at the end for question and discussion.
First, we would like to talk about the research problem and the context of this research. So why did we decide to do this? In 1930, Francis Drury established 21 book selection principles, one of which states that the high purpose of book selection is to provide the right book to the right reader at the right time. This principle closely echoes how we do collection development today. However, is this enough? Academic libraries are often described as the beacon of diversity and inclusion. For example, Cruz in 2019 states that diversity is a cornerstone of the library profession. As libraries navigate in a society that is inherently racist, unjust, and oppressive, it is crucial to critically examine libraries' collection development policies and practices, and whether these policies and practices contribute to inequity, marginalization, and injustice. In fact, this active and critical self-investigation is a necessary path over neutrality. The process of decolonizing library collections is essential to combat traditionally Eurocentric focus by focusing on intentionally inquiring materials. Thus, this research stems from pressing need to understand if and how collection development policies of academic libraries in Canada represent the EDII language and how it aligns with the professional practice of academic librarians. However, before we proceed, let's define EDII for the purposes of this research. We have adopted the diversity, equity, and inclusion definitions from Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The definition of equity states that it is the removal of systemic barriers and biases, enabling all individuals to have equal opportunity and access to benefits from the program. Diversity is defined as differences in race, color, place of origin, religion, immigrant and newcomer status, ethnic origin, ability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and age. Inclusion is defined as the practice of ensuring that all the individuals are valued and represented for their contribution and are equally supported. We have also used the definition of indigenization or decolonization from pulling together BC Campus Guide to Decolonization by Kuhl and colleagues. So the indigenization, decolonization is a process of deconstructing colonial ideologies of the superiority and privilege of the Western thought and approaches, dismantling structures that perpetuate the status quo and addressing unbalanced power and dynamic. So in total, when we look at all of those definitions, we have come up with a EDII definition for collection development. So we look at it as building library collections with a consistent consideration of multiple voices from the community, taking into account race, color, ethnic origin, immigration status, social status, religious views, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, and physical learning abilities, etc., by providing equitable access and representation of these voices in order to include users' needs as the focal point of the collection and dismantle colonial ideologies. So why specifically we wanted to look at the collection development policies? Collection development is a systematic assessment, selection, and deselection of library resources. It helps library staff to meet the collection goals as they relate to the mission of the library, and it informs the library's clientele about the principles by which materials are selected for inclusion. And then when it comes to policies, they play an important role in our practice. So according to Karmark, policies establish priorities and command practice. So it is imperative that libraries take on the development of diversity, equity, and inclusion in their collection development policies. So our overarching question for this research project is, how do collection development policies of academic libraries in Canada reflect the elements of the EDII framework, and how this aligns with the professional practice of collection development librarians, precisely what EDII-related practices collection development librarians implement to ensure that they build diverse and inclusive collections. Now we will talk a little bit about the literature review findings.
Yes, thank you, Marta. So we'll do a quick literature review on the topic. So scientific literature on EDII are plenty and in a lot of different contexts and topic, but EDII in library collection development is still an emerging topic and the literature is quite sparse. It is understood that issues of EDII in collection development is a social issue or social justice issue. And it is crucial to critically examine libraries' collection policies and practices, and whether these policies and practices contribute to inequity, marginalization, and injustice. This is from Morales and collaborators. One idea that comes out a bit is the idea of decolonizing the library collection. This is particular, for example, to Canada. Bloom and Roylance in 2020 says that it is the work necessary to combat a traditionally Eurocentric focus by focusing on intentionally acquiring materials. And a recent publication from Jones and collaborators in 2022 suggests that practices are moving towards more intentionally including resources and materials beyond those of white voices and spending time understanding community needs. Gimnase collaborators in 2022 says that EDII audit can provide actual data to serve as a baseline of understanding, even if it only serves to reaffirm already existing assumptions. New goals and expectations can be established with that process. The importance of EDI framework in collection development practices and policies is reaffirmed because it allows collection development librarians to re-examine and recalibrate their collection practices, especially taking into consideration more and more diverse campuses. Now I'll pass the mic to Ryan for the methodology part.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. In the next section, I'll briefly go over the project stages and the methods used to analyze the data that was collected. So first off, we'll briefly just describe the stages of the project. So in stage one included the environmental scan and creating a repository of collection development policies. During this phase, some of the areas we investigated were whether EDII statements were present at institutional, library, and collection development policy levels. We also collected additional data related to these institutions to create a. During stage 2, we performed a thematic analysis of the collection development policies. For this, we created a set of codes and tagged relevant text within the collection development policies using the software NVivo. This allowed us specific criteria across all of the policies. And stage 3, in stage 3 of the project, we plan to collect data from academic librarians responsible for developing collections using a mixed method questionnaire about their EDI related practices and collection development. All right, and next we will go over the study results. So first, a quick overview of the environmental scan, where we've seen a lot of commitment to EDII principles. In addition to gathering the collection development policies, we harvested data about each university library in Canada. Is there a commitment to EDII principles by Canadian universities? The short answer is yes. At the time of the scan, we found that 76% of Canadian universities have published a statement on their website that explicitly supports EDI principles in their institutions. The next graph represents the institutional EDII statements by the official language of the institution. 76% of English speaking institutions have EDII statements, 94% of French language institutions, and 50% of bilingual institutions have an EDII statement. However, most universities do not mention libraries in their statements. So we looked at how often did these universities have EDI statements and how often did they mention libraries. Only 2 out of the 110 universities we examined mentioned libraries in their EDII statements. So libraries need to explore ways to make their own statements. Here are those 2 mentions. So you can see that they mentioned decolonizing the collection, taking action on the addition of indigenized subject headings, and to increase resources related to groups who are historically underrepresented in library collections. Do libraries make commitments to EDII principles? Some do, but not many. We found that 15 out of the 110 university libraries in Canada have an EDI statement on their website. When cross-referencing our data, we also found an interesting correlation between EDII statements on university websites and EDII library statements. So from 84 universities that include EDII statement, 17% also include a library EDI statement. And from 26 institutions who did not have an EDI university statement, only 4% of libraries, which is 1, had an EDII statement. This indicates that organizational culture could possibly play a role in fostering the commitment to EDII principles across the institution. EDII is a term that we came across in our research, though we did not find specific mention of this complete term in any of the collection development policies. We think that, especially within Canada, it would be even more impactful, an even more impactful commitment to include indigenization as part of EDI statements in collection development policies. 45% of university EDI statements that mention indigenization, and 60% of library EDI statement mention Indigenous issues. This points to an awareness of the need for steps towards reconciliation in universities and academic libraries, and we'd like to see this extended to collection development policies as well.
To put things into perspective, let's look at the bigger picture. While 79% of the higher education institutions in Canada have an EDI statement on their website, 13% of the institutional libraries have separate EDI commitment on their website. When it comes to collection development policies, we have found that 2 policies, 1.8%, that contain explicit EDI, EDII statement, but we have also found that 20% of the institutions contain references to diversity. So it included diversity of users, collections, to equity, specifically equal access, and inclusive spaces. We have also found a correlation between EDII language and how recently the policies were updated. As you can see in this graph, language on diversity and equity starts to become more prevalent in collection development policy starting in 2015. Similarly, the concept of indigenization, decolonization does not appear in policies prior to 2015. And now we will look at some of the findings from the thematic analysis data. During the thematic analysis, we have found several major themes in the collection development policies and used it to code the themes in NVivo software. We have applied the codes in NVivo to collection development policies, and we have found the following themes. So EDI, EDII theme had to do with the direct mention of EDI or EDII language in collection development policies. We have also looked at the indirect mention, so any references to diversity in languages, format, topics, etc. We looked also at the user needs. How do policies address the needs of the library users? We also have looked at the faculty community and recommendations. And now the big topic that came up during the thematic analysis was academic freedom, so any references to the academic freedom or bills of right, accessibility, so references to AODA standards and accessible collections, as well as cultural awareness, so flexibility to respond to the cultural and social needs of the university community.
So when it comes to explicit EDI statements that make clear commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion, we found 2 examples. Both policies were updated in 2022. We see that Brandon University actively seeks to include equitable, diverse, and accessible and inclusive content, while Western Libraries is committed to principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. In these statements, we see language that clearly shows that these libraries have identified the need to make commitments to EDI, whether that be related to material selection, community involvement, or the values of the organization. We will see that in the thematic analysis that the language within the collection development policies, that although the individual terms of EDII are used, the context is not the same. So in our preliminary results, we would like to focus on the EDII concepts used in collection development policies, as well as share the context in which they're used. So thus the direct mentions for equity was about 14% of the collection development policies had equity mentioned. 18% of them had diversity, 2% mentioned inclusion, and 12% mentioned indigenization. Here are some examples of how diversity is being incorporated into some collection development policies. So the first one is to promote the growth of diverse quality content in library collections by collecting materials from decolonial perspectives and diverse voices. And then the next one is the library's mission is to provide easy access to a diverse and dynamic scholarly collection of material in support of the research, teaching, and learning at the university. Mentions that use diversity to describe voices and decolonial perspectives are great examples of EDI principles, but the majority of mentions, which are diverse collections or format, do not work to inform EDI practices. Very few university library collection development policies mention equity, and when they do, they focus on equitable access. Here are some examples. The library's aim is to provide balanced, equitable access to materials in a multi-campus environment. And then next, the library is committed to providing equitable, barrier-free access to our collection in accordance with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. Additionally, 45% of collection development policies from Ontario academic libraries reference the AODA. Accessibility has been mentioned by over 30% of the collection development policies that we examined. Inclusion has been mentioned only 5 times and mostly refers to the inclusive spaces. Here's an example of inclusive language. Library users will have access to library collections with no discrimination based on racialized identity, gender identity or expression, cultural or ethnic background, ability, family status, age, and political or religious beliefs and views. Inclusion is applied indirectly in this case because there's no direct mentions of the term inclusion. Indigenization language is related to promoting reconciliation. However, it's also underrepresented in the collection development policies. Here's one example of the indigenization language, which talks about incorporating Indigenous way of knowing into the collection development practices. The library is dedicated to working towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, understanding the importance of acknowledging the past and calling attention to present challenges. The library commits to incorporating principles of Indigenous ways of knowing into building our collections, as well as into the provision of library services to the wider university community.
So now, in conclusion, we might ask ourselves, what's next with those this data and the things that we've learned from the thematic analysis? One lesson that we've learned is that we found that the use of EDII principles in collection development policy are limited and it's not a well-established practice yet. Very often, collection development policies were not updated in the recent years. So we found actually one that was from the year 2000, which is 23 years ago, which can also contribute to the integration of this vocabulary into their collection development policy. While we could assume that university EDII policies also apply to the libraries and library collection, however, as we have seen from our results, it is not always the case, since most EDII university statements do not mention libraries and their collection. Libraries, and specifically library collections, need to demonstrate their commitment to EDII to have a distinct, clear voice in the conversation. In terms of ways forward, as a result, it will be crucial to continue this work to contribute to decolonization of library collections and adhering to EDI principles. The next step of this project will be to understand how does collection development practices align with the policies and what role the policies play to inform these practices. We hope to do a diverse, or actually, coming back to what was mentioned in the literature review, diversity audits of the collection development policy to know where we're at an institution could be a first step. In addition, it will be important to see whether the users feel that their voices are represented in the collection. Nothing for us without us, so it's important to have their voice heard. Consulting Indigenous communities, elders, students should be a priority for collection development librarians at libraries. This is something that falls outside of the scope of this study, but it is important to investigate. There's also finally work that it needs to be done to encourage libraries to adopt these languages in their policies when developing policies, considering using or including EDII principles and adopt a proactive approach in that sense would be a step forward to achieve a wider inclusion of those terms in their policies. Thank you very much for listening to us today. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.